Okay, so today's lesson is going to take us through what is known as a loop. Now, in a loop, that's what we mean. A loop is any construct in programming that instructs the controller. When I talk about controller, this is more or less a word I created, and I'm going to refer to the controller as the person responsible for running our code. So imagine when you write your code, someone comes, and that person is called a controller. Depending on whichever kind of programming language you are going to be using, the controller is more or less going to be the translator. Okay, so it starts from top to the bottom. But when it gets to a particular statement, depending on which control structure you have used, the control structure is going to determine which of the lines that you've written should be executed. Okay, so the controller now gets to your program, gets to each line, and depending on the kind of structures that you've used, it will get to know which of the lines to execute. So a looping structure or a looping construct helps us to repeat specific number of lines. Okay, and so the program that we have on screen is going to help us. Now, which program? Let's take a look. The program is going to run, or your set of statements is going to be executed repeatedly for as long as a particular condition is true. What am I talking about? Let's take a look at this, and then now I'll talk about some items. On the screen, we can see we have a variable that has been assigned the value 1. And after the variable has been assigned the value 1, there's a condition, and that condition, we are saying that condition is true. If it is raining, it's a statement. If the statement is true, then do all that is on this circle. All right. So basically, for a loop, we have an initialization, we have a condition for the loop to run, and then we have an update. We'll get to that. But let's move from here. So after the loop stops, if there's any statement that follows the loop, then we are going to move to that statement and then execute whatever is in that statement. Okay, so basically that is it over here. I think you've already seen the text on the screen, so let's go to the next stage. This is a loop structure that I've created, and then the structure now modifies, more or less mimics how a loop operates. A loop will only run, so you can think of this orange item as the controller. It moves from one statement to another, checking whether the trying to execute those statements. So think of the blue boxes along the edges of the circle as the statements that you would want to execute. When the orange box gets to it, whatever is in that statement, whatever that statement is supposed to do is going to be run. So the orange box is going to move round and round and round the circle. You can think of all these as the statements in a particular loop. You've heard of loops. You know about the while loop, you know about the for loop, you know about the do while loop. We'll take a look at them in the next couple of slides. But what you need to know now is a loop will move in a particular direction, executing the statement. When it gets to the end of the loop, it will try to check whether that condition that controls the loop is still valid before it now continues again. Take note, if you are using a control variable that changes all the time for your loop's condition to be false at a point, then the statement inside the loop should be the statement that you want your code to execute. What do I mean by that? If you already have a declaration and that declaration is supposed to change anytime the loop runs, then if you need the numbers for a particular usage, then you need to have your lines of statement that makes use of the ever-changing numbers inside the code, inside the loop. I'll demonstrate whatever I'm saying with an example. So over here, I'm going to start this. And when I start, this thing moves, checks the condition is true, it moves again. When it checks it's true, it moves again. It will move continuously because nothing stops this our loop until something happens and then the condition is now false. So the moment the condition is false, the controller cannot move again. And hence, the rest of the statements that are over here will not be executed. What I should have shown on the screen is the moment it is false, the controller moves from there and then comes to the bottom. Hold on. So I have restructured the code all over again. And so the whole point is now the controller will first start by checking whether the condition for the loop is true. If the condition for the loop is true, then it is going to start executing the statements in the loop. When it continuously executes the statements in the loop, what is now going to happen is it will execute each of the statements, which are the blue dots on the circle, until the condition, which is the green thing over here, now changes to red. And then the condition now is false. So the moment it is false, what happens now is you are going to have whatever is executing the statements, no longer executing the blue boxes on the circle, but rather it will come to the next statement after this loop structure. You can think of this as a loop structure. Okay, so let's start and see. So while it is true, it will continuously execute all the blue boxes, to continuously execute them until at a point where it cannot execute no more. Now it moves from the top and now comes to the blue box. From the blue box, when it is done, goes to the green box. So that's basically what the looping structure is all about. In this instance, particular I, and then while the condition over here is true, it continuously executes I until it cannot execute no more. So basically, it will execute till we get to infinity. Okay, that's basically what is happening here. And to stop at a point because I'm using PowerPoint. But basically, the concept is for you to think it's going to infinity. All right, because this condition ever remains true. It doesn't change to false like in the previous slide. Now, this is a program to display the values of I till we get to 4. So anytime it picks the ball is what is the value of I is what is written on the ball. So it picks the ball and checks the condition. We have already talked about the Boolean operator. And the Boolean operator, what a Boolean operator now does is it compares two values. Okay. No, let me call it. The name actually is the relational operator. The relational operator compares two values. And when those two values make an assertion that is true, so we are saying that the value of I, now the value of I is 1. Is I less than or equal to 4? If this assertion that I is less than or equal to 4 is true, then it's similar to what we saw in the previous slide, making this particular statement true. The moment this is true, we will allow whichever value of I to now go on this roller coaster, move round and round in the circle, trying to execute all the statements on the circle. That's basically the whole thing now. Okay. Now, the moment the value of I changes after we execute this statement, which is the update of the control variable is the I over here. The moment the value of I changes, we change the ball that we are using to move round and round. So let's start all over again and see. Now 1 is printed. That's the one that we brought. That's the one that met this display message. And then 3 is also coming to be printed. It means the display, it gets printed. 4 has also met. But 5 will be compared to 4. And the value of I, which is now 5, because of the increment over here, is getting compared, checked with this. I is less than or equal to 4. Is it true? Is this assertion true? If this assertion is not true, then drop it. Do not move round and round. Assume that we are in this particular thing. And so the moment it becomes false, move to the statements that follow. That's basically what the controller is going to do, just like it did in this case. Okay. You understand what happens? It moves to the next statement. All right. So that's basically it for this particular statement. Let's take a look at this particular code written by hand. All right. So over here, I'm going to get a text box, write it here. And I'm going to say initialize a particular variable called I, initialize that variable to 1. And then when you come down now, what I want is I want a while loop. This is for a while loop. Now I'm going to talk about the various kinds of looping. It's going to be in another video, but this is mainly for explanation. Okay, so if you don't know anything about looping, your video is going to come later on. So we are trying to check a condition. And the condition now is saying that the value of I is less than or equal to 4. So you will only enter the body of this while loop. A while loop, if you don't know about a while loop is another structure also talking about repetitive actions. So it's going to enter the while loop. So whatever I'm going to write between the while loop and end while are just statements that I want to execute, provided the condition given up here is true. So for the first time, I is less than or equal to 1. So, or is less than or equal to 4. So we'll enter the body. What I want to do now is to print. The statement now is print. So when I say print, I'm just saying output or write. So if you just want it to be a little friendlier, you can think of print as write. Write the value of I. Now you know the value of I that entered the loop, that was allowed to enter the loop. The value of I that was allowed to enter the loop was what? Was 1. So when we say write I, you know 1 is the one that's going to be printed. The moment I write 1, what I want is the loop is going to move round and round, move in circles. So for the first time it moves in a circle, it will write the value of I, which is 1, somewhere. And when it is done, it will move to the next statement on the circle, like the blue boxes. In this instance, it's going to say the value of I is 1, but I want you to add 1 to it and give it back to I. So I is no longer going to have 1 the moment we move in the circle for the first time. So I is now going to be assigned the value 2. And if you watch the video on variables, we talked about variables being containers. So saying I plus 1 on the right hand side, I'm saying the value of I, which is 1, plus 1, assign it back to the container I. So basically the code on the previous slide is what I've explained in here. So we have I. You understand the concept basically. If you have any questions, put it in the comment section and I'm going to follow you to answer. That's the end of the session. Thank you very much.